and West Coast Swing. What's up, gang? It's Brian B.
And Miss Megan.
And we run a couple of different websites for dancers. One of them is westcoastswingonline.com. The other one is socialdanceonline.com. So whether you are a ballroom dancer or a West Coast swing dancer, we have got you covered. In this video, we're going to talk about the differences and similarities of East and West Coast swing. Now, if this is your first time here, we run those two websites. I'm going to go ahead and run through some basics of the two dances. Oh, that's what I meant to say. We're doing this video live during the lockdown of the coronavirus. So if you're with us live, you have a question, please type it in. Ben will feed us the questions into the video. And if you're not, I hope you survived the coronavirus. But Miss Megan's going to hop off the video. We're going to talk a little bit about the general overview of where these two dances started and where they branched off and became their own separate dances. So they are related. It all kind of goes back to the 1920s and 30s, where swing music became the rage. Swing music was a form of jazz music, and it spawned dozens of different styles of swing dancing. There is literally an almost unlimited style. My dance history doesn't go deep enough to cover any of them, but if you're watching live, we are doing a Q&A with the dance historian Forrest Altman tomorrow, and if you're watching this on delay, we'll drop the link in the description below of that conversation where we talk about the history of several of the different dances. But anyways, those swing music spawned lots of different swing dances. The ballroom dance studios at the time, the dance studios didn't take it very seriously until the late 30s, when it seemed to not go away, and there became one prevalent form of dance called Lindy Hop. Most of us know Lindy Hop. It might have been named after Charles Lindbergh hopping over the ocean. We're not sure. My history's a little weak, but that's the gist of it. So Lindy Hop is really what we owe both East and West Coast swing to. What happened is, in 1942, the chain studios got together and they decided that they need to formalize and teach this form of swing dancing. Lindy Hop seemed a little and the swing dances of the era seemed a little unstructured for them, and they wanted to create a structure, and that became East Coast swing. It actually in a lot of places was called Eastern swing, which is a precursor to the later Western swing, and we'll quickly talk about how that all came about. But that was in 1942 when all the professional ballroom dance studios kind of gathered together, the chain studios, and they basically coined East Coast swing and created the structure that we largely have today. Also in the 30s into the 40s, a guy by the name of Dean Collins, who was a popular dancer from New York City, moved all the way over to Hollywood, California to become famous in movies. He was in several movies. I don't have them off the top of my head. And in the 50s, he was teaching his form of swing dancing. Now, unlike now on YouTube, where we have people, tens of thousands of people all across the world that can watch and learn in real time, we were 3,000 miles apart, New York City to LA and Hollywood. And so the swing dancing evolved differently in different neighborhoods, and specifically on those two major cities on different coasts separated by 3,000 miles. So Lindy Hop and Dean Collins' form of swing dancing really changed shape, being so far away from its roots in New York, and it later became its own dance known as West Coast swing. Now, there's a lot of people influential in West Coast swing, probably none more than the great SKIPPY BLAIR, who, as we shoot this video, is 95 years old, and I've had the opportunity to spend 2 days at her house. So if you're interested in SKIPPY BLAIR, go ahead and Google SKIPPY BLAIR West Coast Swing online, and I've got a great series on SKIPPY. And SKIPPY shared a story of how she ran an ad in 1962 for Western swing, because there was an Eastern swing, that was Eastern, New York City, and there was a Western swing. And no one came up for this Western swing because it seemed country and people didn't like it. So in 1962, she changed her ad with the paper to West Coast swing in 1962, and it's largely been known as West Coast swing since. But that's not the whole story, because my good friend and dance historian Forrest Altman has been tracking the history of West Coast swing over the years, and the earliest reference in documents that we can find for West Coast swing having that name was back in about 1957. I think there's a couple articles in newspapers, and the earliest one we can find is from, I think, February of 1957 in Wyoming, of all places, where the first recorded, at least as we sit here today in May of 2020, the first recorded name of West Coast swing. Now, We do run West Coast Swing online, so we're a little bit more familiar with the history of West Coast Swing. It still remains, in my words, a street dance today, meaning it is not as formalized as the dances taught in ballroom studios. So the pattern structure and the music influences have changed dramatically over the years. Some of the basic influences that you've seen over the years in West Coast Swing have been country dancing, right, from John Travolta in Urban Cowboy, to the hustle that was popular in the 70s. Shag became a big influence around the time, slightly earlier than when I became involved in the dance in the late 90s. And then from the late 2000s and into today, we've been actually influenced by a dance called Zouk quite a bit, whether we know it or not. So that is a brief history of the East Coast Swing and West Coast Swing. Now we're going to talk about the differences in timing, basics, the structures of the dance, and the musical influences. So Miss Megan's going to join me again, and we're going to quickly demo East Coast Swing and West Coast Swing for you. So East Coast Swing would have a triple step, and a rock step. Triple step and rock step. It would move around. It has spins too. Rock step. That would be something along the lines of East Coast Swing. West Coast Swing has what we call a slot, and it stands up and down the slot where the follower kind of owns the slot. Sometimes she'll spin down the slot, and it's my job to get out of the way. So what is the basic of East Coast Swing? If we do this, I'm going to put Miss Megan on this side. So Miss Megan's doing the follower's footwork. The basic is a 6-count basic. 2 triple steps and a rock step, 6 beats total. If we counted it, it would look like this. 1 and 2, 3 and 4, rock 5, and again. 1 and 2, 3 and 4, rock 5, 6. That would be the basic. It has a clear basic. Most of our ballroom dances have a simple, clear basic. West Coast Swing, a little weird. It has several basics. The most important being what we call the push break, or even the sugar push is another common term. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. But West Coast Swing also has something called a side pass. That was a right side pass. It also has a left side pass. And one of the other most common basics is a whip. So West Coast Swing, in its most fundamental sense, has 3 different basics. Versions of a push, where we push our partner away. Versions of a pass, where our partner passes us. And versions of a whip, where she heads back down the slot, which is very much common in Lindy Hop. Now, East Coast Swing does have some 8-count basics. They're not super prevalent in the dance. In West Coast Swing, we mix our 6 and 8-count basics often and a lot. They're both equally seen in a dance, in a social dance, in a competitive dance. In East Coast Swing, you see far, far less 8-count patterns, but they do exist. Now, the West Coast Swing basic, if we counted it, we'll have Miss Megan there. We would dance 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. We call that the push break. It's also called the sugar push, which came from Lindy Hop. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. Side pass would look like this. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. That's a right side pass. If we did it again, 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. Now at this point, you can already kind of see that there's a little bit more of a structure in terms of what we call a slot in West Coast Swing. So Megan has a path or a track that she's dancing around, and it's my job to get out and back into the track. Our third basic in West Coast Swing is a whip. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, and again. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that gives you a little overview. Now, so all swing dancing, most swing dancing has the timing of working in 2-beat increments, and that comes back to our history in the 20s and 30s for swing dance music. So you're going to feel a 2-beat increment. If we did the sugar push in West Coast Swing, we'd have 1, 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So it's a 2-beat increment. If we did a basic in East Coast Swing, we'd have 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1, 2. So you can see that 6-count basic in 2-beat increments is very common for all swing dancing, for sure, when we're talking about East Coast Swing versus West Coast Swing. So we've covered a little bit of the timing, a little bit of the basics, a little bit of the structure. A good way that I like to describe East Coast Swing is if you sat above us and you watched Megan and I dance West Coast Swing, you would see us going back and forth typically in the same slot, right? We'd be typically going back and forth in this slot over and over and over again. East Coast swing, if we danced one basic, I'm going to actually put Megan's back to the camera. If we did one basic, it might look like it's in a slot. But East Coast swing tends to be much more rotational and doesn't have a clear slot. We can go different directions. It tends to look more like a flower. If you look at a flower that's got petals coming out, the slots are all over the place in East Coast swing. They're both stationary dances, so they do not move around the room like you would see in a waltz or foxtrot or tango. They are stationary dances. Now the music, what has gone on with the music? Now both dances have their history in Lindy Hop and swing dance music. Over the years, because East Coast swing became a little bit more formalized through the ballroom dance studios and later a competitive dance, the music stayed a little bit more true to swing music. Some could argue in a competitive aspect today that the dance music we dance to isn't swing, but typically it's a little bit more rooted in swing music. We're going to come back to true swing music here in a second. West Coast swing, because of all of its influences and because of the fact that it wasn't taught in chain studios where they kind of controlled the syllabus across the world, it's evolved, I believe, quite a bit more than East Coast swing. And I've been a professional ballroom dancer and West Coast swing dancer and country dancer, so I've been in all the worlds. And East Coast swing has stayed a little bit more true to its roots, where West Coast swing keeps and follows the music trends. So back in the day, it certainly had some of that hop, the Lindy Hop music and the bounce, or what we call lilt in swing dancing. It certainly had some of that bounce, is another word you might hear. But as we follow the trends of music and as we watch today, it's a much more smoother dance, right? Miss Megan kind of likes, what do you call it, like a zouk-influenced music, which is very trendy. A lot of lyrical
house music.
A lot of lyrical music was the trend over the last decade. So there is a difference in West Coast swing. It's evolving as we speak. So that's a little bit about the differences in the music. So another thing, if we go back to the swing music thing, right? If you look at our East Coast swing basic, we'll go back and we'll go through the timing, basic structure, and music with a little bit more detail now. So in timing, we might say 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6. But really, if you look into what's called swung music or swing music, it's not played evenly by the musician. I'm not a musician. I can't sing. I can just dance. That's all I got. So if we look at a triple step like our basic, we're not dancing 1 and 2 in East Coast swing. We're dancing 1 E and a 2, 3 E and a 4 and a 5, 6. So what happens is we really accent the 2, 4, 6, and 8. Both dances, East Coast swing and West Coast swing, do accent 2, 4, 6, and 8. But East Coast swing, being a little bit more true to its roots in swing dance music, has an uneven triple step. It's not a half beat, whole beat, half beat, whole beat. It's 3/4, quarter, whole, 3/4, quarter, whole. So we have 3/4, quarter, whole, 3/4, quarter, whole, and a rock step. So it naturally, because we're following swing music, has a little lilt and an unevenness or a swing to it. It also is characteristically, when I teach my students, I say we have a swing to our hips, because as I'm getting ready for that triple, there is a natural holding back of the hips, and they release in a little bit of what they might call a semi-Cuban motion. Sorry, my dear. So it has a lot more rhythm in the body in that respect, that stays a little bit more true to its roots. West Coast swing used to have that. It used to have a little bit more bounce as the musical influences kept up with that from the 70s and 80s. It had a lot more bounce, and it started to smooth out over the years. So back in the day, it had a very it had a kind of a swing feel. And I don't dance Lindy Hop, but that you start to see a feel of that unevenness, right? But over the years, we've very much smoothed the dance out, and now you get this kind of a look, which is very influenced a little bit by both the music and a dance that became prevalent in the late 2000s called zouk. So hopefully that digs into a little bit of the differences of East and West Coast swing. If we have no questions on our live feed, If you're watching this live, we're going to be back with a Q&A video after this. On Saturday night, we are going to have a great conversation with a guy by the name of Forrest Elpman. He's a dance historian. If you guys have not seen our stuff, definitely head over to either of our websites. If you're interested in West Coast Swing, westcoastswingonline.com. You can click on the, just enter your email address. You'll get 50 free videos. Or Social Dance Online, same thing. You can enter, get a free membership. We have over 500 instructional videos on our site. Whether you become a member of either site, you're going to get access to all of our stuff if you're a paying member, or if you're a free member, you'll get 50 videos in West Coast Swing, East Coast Swing, two-step, nightclub, cha-cha, waltz. What else are we missing? We have technique videos, tons and tons of content. As we're shooting this video, there's about 520 videos on the site. It's all organized. It's a great player. So we've got some cool resources. We also have, if you're interested in West Coast Swing and techniques, we have a West Coast Swing ebook. That's going to be in the link in the description below. And if you watch any of our videos, check out the link in the description below. We have tons of resources, whether you're interested in East Coast Swing or West Coast Swing or styling or social dancing, country dancing. We run a website for country dancing. All of that great free information is in the link in the description below. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a history and overview of the differences and similarities of East and West Coast Swing, their roots in the Lindy Hop, how they came out of swing dancing. They moved across from the East Coast of America to the West Coast. It changed as it went, how the names established themselves, and how we landed here today running a website called westcoastswingonline.com. So thanks, gang, and we'll see you again on a dance floor when we're not in lockdown for the coronavirus again soon.